We're so excited to be here with you today, Tammy. Tammy is here with us from Sotheby's International Realty, our parent company. She is the Senior VP of Global Servicing and Operations, and honestly has just become a great friend to Colleen and I. So we feel so fortunate that you're able to come on with us today. I'm excited to get to know you a little better, talk about sort of just what's coming for the brand. But before we get into that, would you give us just your elevator pitch?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Colleen and Nicole, both. This is really an honor to be asked to do this. So I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about myself and how we're thinking about things at the brand for Sotheby's International Realty now and into the future. So as you kindly mentioned, I am the Senior Vice President of Global Servicing and Operations, which is a long way of saying simply that I get to work with some of, I think, the most talented people in real estate. And what we do is we support our affiliates in their growth trajectory. And we're also trying to make sure that we bring on new companies to the network that will be additive to the power of the Sotheby's International Realty brand. I've been with the company for 19 years now. And it definitely doesn't feel that long because it's been so interesting and varied. I've had a process of getting to where I am, which started out as being a lawyer, being the general counsel for Sotheby's International Realty, and before that in private practice, which maybe we'll get into a little bit, but is kind of that a winding road to how I got here, which I never anticipated I'd be. If you asked me 30 years ago, which I just celebrated my 30-year law school reunion in Boston last month. If you asked me when I graduated, would I be doing this? I'd be like, what are you talking about? No way. I didn't go to law school to do that. So it's been really interesting. I've been lucky to have people in my life who have guided me, and I absolutely love doing what I do because I get to work with the most interesting people in the world and around the globe. So that's a little bit about me.
You're here. We can end the podcast right now.
I know. And I'm seeing. No,
Mic
honestly,
drop.
last week we did an event and I was thinking about it sounds, we say it over and over almost to the point where it doesn't sound genuine, but it's like the people in this brand, it's incredible. And I mean, I feel like having you as the creme de la creme because there's just, it has to start somewhere, right? And so that's what I feel like you really set that bar. And I have to say one of my favorite moments that I've kind of been a part of with you was when you brought your son onto the stage at the GNE in Nashville. I feel like, you said your journey, we'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And I think, like I said, anyone listening, just to kind of get to know you a little better, I feel like.
We'd love to hear more about it, but if you could just not make me cry as well, that would be a positive.
I know, Colleen
because
cries over everything, but
I know I bawled like a baby when you did that.
Well, for me, it's such a true compliment that people would even remember, what I said on stage, however many months ago. But that whenever I get up and talk to our network, I always want to relate it back to a personal experience that I hope will resonate. And not just an experience, but how does that impact how we lead or how we conduct our business? And so part of that story was kind of the next evolution to the story I told at the GNE prior to that. And I think that's where I need to start, which is, everything I do, probably all roads lead back to family. And the dynamics that I grew up with are as a first generation American. And in my household, that meant that a couple things. I was different than everybody else in my neighborhood, one thing. I didn't necessarily feel different, but, again, looking back, wow, I was very different with that experience. And then education for my parents meant mobility. So my parents emigrated to the United States in the early 60s, thankfully with a really great education and knowledge of the language, but pretty much on their own. So they had to start from scratch. And so I saw my father and my mother work really hard to establish a life for us. And again, when you're a kid, you're just going with the flow. You don't realize how hard your parents were working at that time for you. And the other thing is my father was very prescriptive about what he saw as success. And so it followed that he would guide me in that way. And so in his mind and in our culture, success is becoming a medical doctor or becoming a pharmacist or an engineer. And that's what he wanted me to do. When I went off to college, I started out as a biology major because I wanted to be what he felt was success. So that was doctor first and foremost. And it just became really clear to me early on that I was not going to succeed in that path. I didn't have a love for science. I wasn't all that. I didn't feel like I was great at it. And I was working super, super hard and still not seeing the results that would allow me to get into medical school. So I pivoted in a way that, like I was trying to think, like, what else would my father approve of? And after lots of conversation with him, we decided law school would be acceptable. And that's really how I found my way to law school. I didn't grow up saying, like, I want to be a lawyer, but I had his approval and it turned out to really be the right thing for me. I loved it. I
You're
loved the
really good
critical
at it
thinking
too. You're really
challenge.
good at it. Yeah.
Well, I do believe like when you love something, you can really achieve success. And I knew that I wanted to be a litigator. I wanted to be in court, or at least I thought that's what I wanted at that time. So I dove headlong into a career in litigation, starting with, working for a judge to understand like how that practically works. The thing I loved about litigation is that you have to really quickly become an expert in whatever your client's business is. So I spent more than a decade in private practice and I started just doing all types of litigation. And what I started to see was that the partners who were the most successful had four things in common. They were the ones who were continuously honing their craft. They were learning all the time. So that was the first thing. They worked incredibly hard. Again, you just got to throw yourself in and you dedicate yourself to it. And those are the ones who were successful. The third thing is I started to realize they had a specialty. So while initially I was like just as a young associate doing whatever anybody told me to do, I realized the ones who were successful had a clear direction and they were known in their field to be specialists in that area. And then the fourth thing that I probably wished I had learned a little bit earlier on or understood the impact of it was the most successful ones were incredible networkers and they generated their own business. One of the firms I worked for had a real estate and land use practice that spun off a lot of litigation and those partners in that group were not litigators. So they invited me to join their group to lead the real estate and construction work. So I got to see really complex real estate transactions go bust and go badly, because that's what happens as a litigator. You see it at the very tail end.
Yeah.
Where things go wrong. Same on construction projects. There was a lot of construction litigation work. So I got to handle multi-party construction litigation and poured through documents, as you might imagine, on a construction project, huge construction project. There's like tons and tons of documents. So you have to learn all about the different trades and what went wrong and understand that every detail on complex projects matter. So those were some of my early experiences that informed a real love for real estate and construction and how all that works. And another thing that really stands out for me early on was that the firm I was with had very, very few female partners. And one of the women partners came into my office one day and she said, you want to really be successful in this business, you have got to develop your own business. You cannot just rely on the business that other partners kind of feed you as a young associate if you want to become partner. I did not realize the impact of how right she was until much later on in my career. So, when people like that say stuff to you, someone you admire, you to really take that in and think about it. And I wish I had listened sooner or heard her sooner in my career. So
that was
anyway,
that was a mentor. Were there other mentors early on in your career that kind of gave you other kinds of advice? And kind of jumping off of that too, the mentors, do they always know that they're mentoring you? Or is it kind of a scenario where you're like taking from somebody?
That's a really good question. I didn't necessarily view her as a mentor, which is maybe why I wasn't paying as close attention, because we're talking about the late 90s here. So women who were in partnership were not thinking about being mentors. They were thinking about like how to survive and A, become a partner, and B, stay a partner and be a respected partner. And the only way to be a respected partner back then was to be generating a lot of business. So I don't know that, she even viewed herself as a mentor, but when you ask about mentors I had, honestly, most of them were men, because that's just the field I was in. While in law school, there are a lot of women in law school. There are not, more so now than there were back then, but there were not a lot of women in leadership. So the folks who were in leadership that I aspired to be like were mostly men, and so many of them were willing to mentor me and give me really good advice.
Makes sense. Same for me.
Yeah.
Same. I've
Really,
recently
ultimately.
though come into that, like, I feel like comes to a head when, like, not to take it in that whole direction, but it's like when you become a mom, I feel like that comes to a head because so much of it doesn't align necessarily, just in not to generalize, but inherently like who we are. And I think taking it back to, for me, like when you brought your son out on the stage at the G&E and like you're like embracing like being a mother, being a leader, being in that space. I mean, I grew up in a time where I actually was thinking the last couple of days, and it's not anything I grew up around, like very hardworking mothers, but I didn't know anyone who was necessarily like a breadwinner or an executive. That's not an area that, like, where I grew up. And so like my whole sort of path is just so foreign. And then a lot of, like, from a professional standpoint, I had people that were mentors personally or that I admired in other ways. And then like when you have that like early motherhood hits you and you're like, okay, this doesn't necessarily work. And like, where are the people that are doing this? And I love that about you and the role that you're in, because for me personally, I've benefited from that, from seeing you doing what you're doing. And like, I love, and I feel like probably a lot of our listeners would love to hear more about that whole part of your journey too. So like coming from that standpoint of having those mentors and then like how you sort of evolved.
Tammy, you have such an unusual blend in my mind of an apparent wisdom. It just comes through your ability to articulate complicated things in a very simple way that everybody can understand. There's incredible poise, but also there's this accessibility, which is, I think, unusual. Usually you have all those qualities, and yet you don't have someone that you can necessarily relate to. I think you have such an unusual blend of those.
Well, I really appreciate all that you guys have said, but Nicole, to your point, it took me a while to get to this. Like, so as you were saying, Nicole, like early on in your career when you're grinding and you do have mentors who are men who, again, at that time mostly had wives who dealt with everything on the home front, and they were just really focused on works. Not to say they weren't awesome dads, but had different responsibilities, let's just say. And it took me a long time to talk about my kids in a professional setting, because I was always like, I'm not going to talk about my kids. I'm not going to talk about all the stuff that I have to do as a mom. Because there was, from a mentor and partnership perspective, there was no one to talk to about that. Like, I wasn't going to talk to the guys about that. I probably could have, but I just didn't feel comfortable or confident enough early on in my career to do that. So this has really been an evolution. And I've also been really fortunate to have peers who are really awesome women who are doing great things in their career, but were also at the same time experiencing the same things I was in terms of children and home front and all of the responsibilities that come with that. And it's not just the women who can relate. After that talk, there were just as many men who came up to me afterwards to share their stories about either their own experience or their experience with their kids, and how that has helped change how they approach change. When I was trying to think, what have I gone through that I can share with somebody that might be able to relate to having to be open to change? And kind of to bring it a little bit full circle, my upbringing, it wasn't open. I mean, lawyering was like a very big change, but on the spectrum, lawyering wasn't that much of a change. So if I had told my father I wanted to be a professional musician, I think, his head would have, spun. And it wasn't easy for me to accept it either. But once I did, it has been so amazing. And I just wanted to share that. When you accept something like that and you dive headlong into it, there's nothing that you really can't achieve or change in yourself. And I felt like that might resonate with people, or I hoped that it would.
Oh, there's no doubt. And I think, everybody in that room, we'd gone through a number of changes over the last several years. I know here in Massachusetts, we're going through additional regulatory changes. And I feel like the more that you can exercise that muscle of embracing change, the easier it gets with every successive change, because I think it's a
True.
certain degree of confidence building that sort of happens. Like, hey, we did this. Do you remember this? We just did this recently. And we did it well, and we came out the other side. I think to be able to take experiences within your own personal life and then to apply them in your professional life is such a great way to not have to go through the long, arduous process of developing a skill. You're just basically parlaying a skill you've already developed in another part of your life and applying it. And I think, it's so neat because I was telling someone the story about you bringing your son on stage recently. And I said it was such a beautiful and powerful way for all of us to get to know you just a little bit better. And I think that display of your own personal experiences really just expanded all of our connections to you. It was just a really lovely experience to share with you, because it was clear that it was like a beautiful experience for you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because, again, Colleen, I don't, you've been in the business for a long time as well. And it's interesting to hear Nicole's perspective too, because when I was growing up in the profession or professionally, again, that wasn't something that was comfortable for me to do. And so it's hard for me to also shed that persona a little bit. Like,
Yep.
I don't have to be all business all the time, because especially in this business, probably perhaps more so than any that I can think of, the people to people connection is so important. And so it's I have to make sure that I'm reflecting that as well,
Yeah.
if that's what this industry demands. And so I've been trying to do more of that. It's not like the most comfortable place for me to be, but
Yeah.
the reception has been so lovely and warm that it is encouraging me to do it more often.
Yeah, and it's, I think in essence, like hiding that, first of all, like it's not just moms, right? Like to your point now, thankfully, like a lot of the men on our team, it's a 50-50 household now. So all
Yeah.
these things that we're talking about are so hard. My husband is doing, there's definitely things. There's, I think, a mental load that hasn't shifted, but like he's doing just as many things I am. Like he'll relate if somebody's like, oh my gosh, like this is the back to school thing. Like we're dividing and conquering. And so it's less about like a specific gender and more about just like embracing the family thing. And I think when you're saying change and things like that, it's like if we don't talk about things and we're not open, then we're just perpetuating that perception that like you're less capable if you have a family home, or you're not really like it's like, in fact, no, I had like 12 conflicts that I had to deal with this morning before I even got to work. And so I'm not really stressed over these changes. We're going to get through them. Like you have a better perception, you have more flexibility, and you just have like this layer of, I don't know, like it feels like a superpower in a way, because you're just like, I don't even know how I'm handling all this right now, but I am. So I'm going to talk about it, because if I don't, it's almost like me saying, like admitting defeat or saying that perception is correct when it's not. So you putting that on display, I think it spoke to everybody, no matter which like phase of life you're in, right? I'm in the audience. I work with my dad. I work with other members of my family. So there's that layer. So cool to see as a mom. At the time, I was like very new mom, like away from my 2 toddlers, and seeing you there was like, okay, you can go have your own life. You can go be successful. You can go do all these things, and then give your kid that like freedom that like you're not living life through them. I already knew and felt like we had a great connection to you, but I just felt like that was really something for everyone. And I feel like it was a huge moment in time for me in terms of lessons in leadership. So I would love to hear more about your leadership style and how that's developed over the years too.
I think I've learned as much from the great leaders that I've worked with as much as experiences that I felt weren't as great, especially earlier on in my career. What I try to be is someone that, as I have kind of had this career, would have liked to have had in a leader as I was doing that. And so one of the things that throws me off is like inconsistency in a leader. I want to be able to have confidence in how someone's going to react to a situation. And so I want to be that steady leader, not someone who can't change their mind, because you have to be, again, open to change and different ideas, which might change the direction that you're going in. But if people know you well enough and trust you, that you've earned, if you trust, they know that you're going to support them in what they're doing. And I think it gives you a level of freedom to take risks. I don't succeed at it all the time, but it's definitely what I strive for.
I'm curious, just going back to, you said, you just celebrated your 30-year from law school graduation. What did Tammy 30 years ago? Where did you think you would be today? Just sort of like giving a little bit of a deeper dive into your journey and your career path.
So, when you graduate from law school, to me, the two pinnacles of like success in a legal career would be to be a partner at a law firm or become a judge. Those were the two things that I felt like would have been the top levels of success. And so that's I set out to do. I clerked for a judge who, it was a she, and she was a great mentor to me. But she also was very of the mind that, you don't really discuss family. You're focused on the work. You have to be excellent at the work. And she held me to that standard to the point that sometimes I was afraid to go into her chambers with something unless like I knew what I was talking about inside and out, because you just graduate from law school, you really don't know much about like how things work. You know how to critically think, but you don't know how things work day to day as a lawyer. So she taught me that, like, I had to know the rules of court inside and out. But she also taught me that, you have to keep things in perspective, because there were times where she would be assigned the after hours judge. So emergent issues would come to us. And a lot of times lawyers would push to say, like, you have to make a decision right now. It's an urgent situation. There's no time to get a response from the other side. You have to act right now. And the one thing she taught me was what we're dealing with. We were in the criminal division at that time. We're dealing with life impacting decisions. There's always time to make sure we understand both sides of the situation. And it's really important to do that.
Yeah.
Those were kind of two early lessons that I learned from her. But it's also where again, very few women on the bench at that time. So when she was in her courtroom, she was very serious all the time. There was no personal banter. There was none of that. When lawyers walked into her courtroom, they understood that they needed to get down to business.
Makes sense. That makes sense. Even here, when we ask a question, you always take a beat to understand the question and process it before I've seen all great leaders do that. I mean, Larry's a common one for that. Sometimes I'll rush to give an answer on something and he's like, well, hold on, ask 3 more questions, basically. And it's in that deep dive that I understand the question better. I understand the situation better. And then I can come up oftentimes with a simpler answer. It's a better and simpler answer as a result of taking that extra moment, basically. I was wondering if knowing all of this about you, if you can kind of now pivot into what's happening within the brand and how your role within the brand, you're kind of seeing us into this next chapter, which obviously a lot of things have changed. The brand continues to grow. Tell us a bit about what you see in the future for this brand, what you guys are working on, and also we're curious about how you see us within that.
So, one of the 4 things I talked about in terms of success early on for me involved that, that 4th pillar of developing business as a roadmap to success. And so, one of the things that I transitioned from being in-house counsel for Sotheby's International Realty, the general counsel, to the business side about 5.5 years ago. And I think one of the biggest lessons for me is that while our ultimate client is the consumer, what can we do to help our brokerages and our global real estate advisors get to that ultimate client? Because that was the hardest thing for me in my kind of journey in private practice that did not come naturally to me. And it was probably because of the mindset that I had, that I was approaching it with. I felt like I was selling something, like
Yes.
I had to go in and sell somebody on paying me $600, $700 an hour. Because I did get to partnership, and then it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, because of that part in particular. That's the part I like the least. So I have such respect for the global real estate advisor who has to go out and generate business and create a business for themselves. And that's their livelihood. That's how they support their families. So I take that really, really seriously because I know it's not easy. And so, what can we do to help at Sotheby's International Realty? What can we do to help make that part better so that we provide the tools for people really to be successful? And it's not just about throwing tools at people,
Right.
right? And that's what my
Right.
team is really invested in from a service perspective. And we take that word really seriously, service. Anybody on my team has such a servant heart, like they want to genuinely help people. And we're constantly brainstorming about what can we do to improve and help the lives of our global real estate advisors and our brokers who support them, obviously, to be more successful. So that's really what we're focused on. We're constantly thinking about how to improve in that space.
That's definitely been the secret sauce, I think, because that's exactly how we operate. I think that's one thing I always say that people can't replicate, or like it's so intangible that like that exists across the board. And I just don't think any other brand that, like, from a referral standpoint or just anything, someone stopping into an office, like, it's so consistent. And I feel like where everyone's so hyper focused on tech and tools, like you said, it's like those are a dime a dozen.
Yeah.
But like the actual human element's becoming more and more rare. And that layer of services, it's like we have every tool that we could need. We have every tool that you could want. You're not going to find anything that we don't have that you could have somewhere else. But like that's not the hard part. The hard part is that consistency, that human layer, and that is just like the Sotheby's way across the board.
I actually would even argue that that's changing even to be more and more the case. I think with AI, the tool piece is shifting so much that, in a way, I think even the concept of applications is becoming almost an antiquated one, right? It'll be a product that essentially is just filling all of those needs or helping to eliminate all the low value tasks. So it's the high value human interaction piece, the partnership that's really hugely important. It so comes through with your team. I mean, we just had Lauren with us last week helping our associates embrace the brand and really become immersed in it. And she didn't do it from she comes in and she gives a presentation and then she leaves standpoint. It's very much a getting to know people, trying to understand who the people are in the room, and then helping them to identify ways that they can leverage it. It's a very one-to-one, customized, kind of tailored approach. And I think that the power that comes from that, it's more work to do it that way. Let's face it, it's a whole heck of a lot more work than to just give a boilerplate presentation. But I think the effectiveness is probably 5 to 10x what it would be if she did it the other way. So it definitely comes through without a doubt.
I couldn't agree more with you both on the topic of human touch, white glove touch in every interaction, whether it's from us to you all, from our corporate. And I hate the word corporate. Like,
me too.
Whenever someone says like, oh, this is corporate, it's like immediately the shield goes up, like, they brought so and so from corporate in.
Right. Yep.
Feel that way.
Yeah.
And so anytime we're introduced differently than that, I feel like I notch a little win, because we want to be an extension of you. And so we just want to help. We don't want to be this other, we want to be integrated. And as, of course, okay, here's the lawyer in me. I have to say, you're each independently owned and operated, but the level of support that we want to provide to you, we want it to feel natural. Like, oh yeah, Lauren can step in here and be on track, aligned with what we want to accomplish. And I don't have to explain all of that to Lauren.
Right.
As an owner of a brokerage, I don't have to explain it. to anybody on the team because they get it, you know,
Yep.
constantly evolving to make sure we are bringing value.
Yep.
I love
It's
that.
interesting. We use the language of the brand typically more than anything because it doesn't feel like corporate. I mean, Lauren feels like she's just a member of our team. You do too. I mean, that's ultimately, you guys aren't,
Mhm.
it
That's the
doesn't feel like
ultimate
another
compliment.
entity. I mean,
Yeah,
it
that's the
feels like a
ultimate compliment.
partnership.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, this is my favorite part, Tammy. It's been so fun to just take a little bit of a deeper dive into getting to know you and your path and just talking about, what your role is at the brand and where that's headed. But I'd love to know, we have 3 lightning round questions, and I would love to lead with just what are you most excited about in terms of the future of the brand?
It's something we touched upon, but I want to set it out in a really practical way, which is um, the opportunity that we have collectively as a network, as Sotheby's International Realty, to grow together into the future. I'll give you a great example, and I know you guys will have a million more of these examples, and I would be willing to bet anything on it because that's just the way our network works. Our owner of a brokerage in New Zealand, Mark Harris, called and said, I'm working with a potential client. We've done a little bit of business with him and his family, but he's thinking about selling something very, very valuable real estate, and he really wants to understand the power of the Sotheby's International Realty Network. He happens to have a trip to New York City coming up, and would you mind meeting with him just to share a little bit about the brand? And I could tell this was a very important opportunity and client for Mark. And I, of course, want to do anything I can to help anybody in our network share about Sotheby's International Realty and the value we can bring collectively. So I wrote back to Mark and I said, of course, I'd be happy. Do you mind if I ask one of our top agents in the New York office to join? She is quintessential Sotheby's International Realty. And he said, absolutely, would love for her to join if she would. Obviously, our top producers and agents are extremely busy and they understand the value of time and how they need to spend it and where they need to spend it and who they need to spend it with. But it took less than a minute for her to respond to my request, like, hey, would you mind joining me for a little portion of my meeting with this prospective client? Absolutely. So the two of us spent about an hour and a half with this prospective client and his advisor, and we had a great conversation. And of course, she brought, amazing storytelling and successes. And I talked about the power of the brand. Then he mentioned that he would be going to London in a couple of weeks. So I said, would you want to connect with our office in Mayfair that's close to where he was staying in London? And he said, yeah, absolutely. That would be great. Same thing, reached out to our colleagues in the London office immediately. Be happy to do this to help our colleagues in New Zealand. In very short order, they had the whole thing set up. And he went and he met with, our colleagues in London, and he was just floored by the fact that in less than 3 business days, we had organized all of this for him. He hadn't signed any agreement with us. He hadn't committed to being our client, none of that. And everybody gave him some really good advice on the approach. And it wasn't about selling us as Sotheby's International Realty. It was about how could he achieve his goals for this property. Whether you use us or not, you've met with like the best of the best in all of these great cities of the world. And so things like that really excite me about this network. And with that, I just think our future is limitless. That's what really excites me, the people of this brand.
I love that. We started with the people, rapping with the people.
That.
It's also fun because we can talk about it so openly because you can't go emulate it. It's just, you have to live it. You have to, like, it's not that easy, which is obviously why it's working. What excites you the most about where the industry is heading?
So, what excites me most is that there's constant innovation, right? So every day is going to be a different day. Um, and what we do with it and what we have been able to do with it, it's like Colleen, I think it's like you said, like you remind yourself that you have, because we have longevity in the industry and with this brand, we know that we can continue innovating and continue to raise the bar on what we do and how we do it. I mean, what we're all talking about today, AI, we may be talking about something else, in a year, but we know that we're going to harness it and we're going to do amazing things with it. So I feel the thing I'm most excited about is that whatever challenge comes, we turn it into an opportunity. And I have the confidence that we're going to continue to always do that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Agreed.
What's one piece of career advice you wish you had received earlier on?
I love this question, and I want to hear what your guys' answer would be to this. But for me, the advice I wish I had received early on was don't doubt yourself, find your voice and use it. Some of that probably only comes with experience in building confidence, but I wish I had heard that more often and earlier in my career. So I'd love to hear how you two would answer that question too.
I was thinking when you're saying that, like, I almost feel like mine would be the same. And I feel like a lot of what I wish, it's like anything, what you wish you could tell yourself are things that you just needed time to figure out. I love the find your voice, but you don't have to use your voice to find it, is what I wish I knew early on. It's like, you don't have to be speaking. Like, my favorite thing to do when someone asks me, like, what should we do with this, is like, what do you think? And like we talked about taking a beat earlier. It's like my version of taking a beat. It's like, I feel like you probably have a solution, right? Like, I don't know. So I think I wish I knew earlier to just, and like, you don't need to try to prove, and that's a young person thing, I think, but it's like, you feel like you need to speak, you need to be heard, you need to prove yourself, but it's like the best thing you can do is like listen. And especially from a leadership standpoint, you get so much more from people when you're just like, why don't you tell me what you think about that? And you're going to get way better ideas. The whole reason you're surrounded by all these people is because they think differently than you. It's just like a little bit work smarter, not harder, but yeah, just a little bit, take a step back. And also that probably comes like, it parlays from what you said, like just be more sure of who you are, what you're bringing to the table. You don't have to say as much or do as much. Sometimes that's taking away from your energy.
Yeah. I think for me,
there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said.
I think for me, it's been the big challenge, or the thing I've had to learn over the course of my career is that, what I wish I had learned earlier, essentially, or what I could tell myself would be that everybody's on their own journey. And the question is to find out if your journeys align and when they don't align, by the way, because I do think that's one of the challenges that I've had in my career is just realizing that sometimes I'm preserving and making something work that shouldn't work. And ultimately, that's kind of like one of the tricks that I've been trying to discover is when how can you be clear and upfront and everybody has transparency so that we understand when we're aligned and when we're not aligned and find the solution for them.
It's like the station. Like my dad actually used to say that, like, oh, it's like a train, another one will come. But I feel like the train station analogy is a real thing. It's like you're going to get on a train, you're going to ride for a few stops with someone, you're going to get off the train when you're young. Like you might, like whether it's like a relationship or something feels so good and you don't want it to end. It's like still you had your lesson, you had your time. It's like, yeah, like knowing when to get off or let one go, so you don't miss the one you're meant to be on or whatever. As cheesy as that is, I always like that analogy.
I had not heard that analogy before.
Yeah.
I like it.
Well, this was awesome. I feel like we could talk for hours, and I know your time is so valuable. So I am so grateful that you took this time with us. I truly believe if you are a part of the Sotheby's International Realty brand or part of the industry or just, someone that's aspiring to be a stronger leader, especially a female leader, this is something that people will really value and something that'll be so worth a listen. So thank you so much for your time today, Tammy. I hope we can catch up in person soon.
I'm sure we will.